Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Catherine DiMatteo from the new Student Orientation team. This is an NSO panel session on racial justice and confronting racism. Please note that this session will be recorded. Closed captioning is available by clicking on the closed captioning icon in Zoom. We recognize that this program may address sensitive topics that could be difficult for some students based on personal experiences with this content. Please note that if you need to leave at any point for self-care, you are welcome to do so. There is also a confidential counselor available today for students who may need additional professional support. The confidential counselor is available today from 2:15 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time and can be reached by clicking the confidential counselor link found on the Canvas page for the Racial Justice Panel event. I would now like to introduce the moderator for this event, Rosemary Kilkenny, Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Georgetown University, who will begin this program.
Good afternoon. Let me assure you that we are all in a very, very good mood, and I'm sure you have ideas as to why that is. Let me add to the chorus of welcomes that you have already received as new students from Georgetown, as new students from members of the NSO committee, as well as our students, faculty, and staff. Let me also assure you that you are joining a community of forward-looking members, including faculty, staff, and students who contribute to the diversity of our community. A community devoted to social justice, restless inquiry, and respect for each person's individual needs and talents. For many of our students, Georgetown is home because of the university's care for the whole person, as many of us attempt to live out our lives caring for others. As you embark on your educational journey, you will discover that our community and alumni are a valiant force for change in the world, with our rich Catholic and Jesuit identity and heritage as the backdrop. As I mentioned earlier, this has been a very good week, beginning on Monday, as Dr. DeJoya, our president, presided over the annual commemoration of the life and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who, as you all know, was a drum major for civil rights, justice, and equality. 2 days later, we witnessed the liberating swearing in of President Joseph Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, whose administration ushers in a new era of civility, truth-telling, hope, and optimism, values that we longed to experience. As Catherine has mentioned, our panel today is on racial justice, and one of the many essays that we ask you to read is titled Confronting Racism, authored by our eminent president, Dr. John DeJoya, our 48th president and first lay president of the institution. Under his leadership, the university evolved from a national institution of higher education to a global university. President DeJoya served as a senior administrator and as a faculty member in the Department of Philosophy, becoming our president in July 2001. Like all of you, he is an alumnus of the university. There's much more that I can say about Dr. DeJoya's accomplishments on campus and indeed in higher education circles, at home and abroad. But in the interest of time, you will find an abundance of information about his achievements and service on the website of the President's Office, as well as on the NSO website. We will now hear from Dr. DeJoya, who will make opening remarks, and let us give him a warm welcome. Dr. DeJoya?
Thank you very much, Rosemary, and it's an honor to be here. I want to thank you and Catherine for opening our gathering, and I'm especially grateful to you, Rosemary, for helping to bring us all together. It's a privilege to be with all of you, and I know these past few days have been very busy here in Washington. As Rosemary just shared with you, we experienced the historic inauguration of President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. This is one of the special aspects of being members of this community, the connection that we have to civic engagement and civic life in our nation. And there will be moments such as this throughout your time at Georgetown, moments that can powerfully remind us of the responsibilities that we all have to contribute to our shared civic life. Yesterday, we held a special welcome ceremony to formally mark your entrance into our academic community. And this afternoon, you take part in this very important conversation, which will provide you with important resources and knowledge as you seek to understand the contribution that you can make to our community and to our world. In these gatherings over the past few days, you've heard about what it means for you to join a university community, the values and experiences that you will share as part of this community. We reflected on the mission of universities, our enduring commitment to formation, inquiry, and the common good. We can see these three elements of who we are come alive as we seek to understand the responsibilities that we as individuals and as an institution have in the promotion of racial justice. 156 years ago, the 13th Amendment was passed, abolishing slavery in the United States. Yet our society is still grappling with the problems of racism and racial injustice against people of African descent. We see the structural manifestations of this in the need to address persistent gaps in income, housing, education and health disparities, police violence, unemployment rates, mass incarceration and unjust sentencing practices, environmental discrimination. And we see it in our daily lives, in words and actions that reflect racist attitudes, in the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on Black communities and communities of color. And we saw it on display at the insurrection at the US Capitol on January 6th, when symbols of hatred were forced into the Capitol building by those who sought to violently disrupt the democratic process. What we witness, what we experience, must lead us to confront issues of racial injustice. And the university can be an invaluable resource to us in this work. We engage in the work of formation. We're engaged in the work to understand our own interiority, our beliefs and attitudes, and our biases and prejudices, our ways of interpreting and making meaning in our world. And we must ask ourselves, how might we, perhaps unconsciously or unintentionally, be contributing to or perpetuating these legacies of injustice? For our Black students and our students of color, when you experience racism and discrimination in your daily lives, these are external, but these are blocks. These are external blocks to your own flourishing that we must confront with you as you seek to achieve all that you are capable of. All of us are engaged in this work of personal formation, of securing that sense of authenticity that we are who we are called to be, that we are who we are meant to be. And we engage in the work of inquiry. We know that historically, the very ideas of race and subsequently of racism are social constructs, the product of early American scholarship developed and nurtured in order to justify the institution of slavery. But as you heard yesterday, our role in society is to pursue the truth. We must endeavor to uncover and expose those constructs in our world which do not recognize the dignity of each person. We must be unrelenting in this pursuit. And finally, we advance the common good. We seek to make a difference in our communities and uphold our shared responsibilities for our civic life together. The common good, the idea that there's a good that we can achieve together that we could never hope to achieve alone. This is the work that you will come to know and have the opportunity to contribute to through your scholarship, your service, your engagement during your time here at Georgetown. And we as a community have been engaged in a number of projects as a response to this call for racial justice in our nation. You'll hear about many of these during your time here at the university, but whether it be our efforts of our Health Justice Alliance or our Health Disparities Initiatives, our programs addressing community-based policing, reform, and transformation, or initiatives on technology and society, our work in the humanities, on African American history and culture, on equity and education, public policy, and environmental justice, our initiative on slavery, memory, and reconciliation, our Prisons Injustice Initiative, which seeks to uplift the dignity of people incarcerated and to end the injustices in our prison system. Each of these activities and more help to animate our understanding that a commitment to the common good is inextricable from our understanding of our history as a nation and the urgent work to ensure that our communities support the flourishing of all of our people. You will engage in this work here at Georgetown, guided by extraordinary faculty and staff who bring unparalleled wisdom and knowledge about how to address and respond to the issues of racial justice. Today, you're going to hear from 4 individuals who have made a disproportionate difference in their areas of work. The woman who introduced me, Rosemary Kilkenny, who for 40 years has helped to shape our efforts on diversity and inclusion here at Georgetown. And Dr. Angelyn Mitchell, foremost scholar of Toni Morrison, founder of our African American Studies here at Georgetown. And Dr. Christopher King, who is leading efforts here in Washington, D.C. and nationally to transform how we respond to issues of health equity. And Dr. Adna Johnson, who has provided invaluable leadership in fostering inclusion and equity for all of our students, to ensuring the conditions are here for the flourishing of each and every one of you. So as you engage in this conversation today, guided by these 4 extraordinary leaders, I hope that you will find inspiration in your own journeys toward justice, in your own work to combat racism, in your own commitment to advancing the common good. It's a privilege for me to be here and to welcome you all. I wish you the very best, and now I'm going to turn it back over to my colleagues.
Many thanks, Dr. DeGioia, for those thoughtful and powerful remarks.
Thank you, Rosemary.
You're certainly welcome. And now it is time to hear from our panel. Okay, we're all assembled. Since Dr. DeGioia did the honors of introducing all of you, I will not be redundant. So let's just dive into the questions that I've prepared for you to engage in this great conversation at this time in our history. And we will also leave some time at the end for students from the audience to pose any questions that may come to mind. As both Dr. DeGioia and I mentioned, we witnessed a very significant event in our history this week on Wednesday with the swearing in of Dr. Joseph Biden as our president and Vice President Kamala Harris, the first African American and Asian president, an Asian woman vice president in our country. What does this mean, what does this historic event mean to you as you are interviewing and engaging with students who come to you for advice on any number of topics? What does this day actually mean? And what are the implications for the young men and women that you advise? Let's begin with you, Dr. Johnson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to President DeGioia and to Ms. Kilkenny and to my colleagues, Dr. Mitchell and Dr. King. It's an honor to sit with you all this afternoon. I think that to answer your question, Rosemary, about the inauguration, the historical inauguration, for me, it comes down to the notion of representation matters, which we've been seeing a lot lately. Netflix is using that,
Yes.
To market some of the shows and films that are showcased on Netflix. But I think that people want to see themselves in the society around them in positive places. And so to see a Black woman, a South Asian woman, seated in sort of the highest office in the land, the second highest office in the land, is inspiring. And we have research in career theory, so sort of how people come to understand what they want to do for a living, and research on mentoring and education from, elementary, middle school, high school, and higher ed that says people do better, right, when they see themselves reflected in the faculty, in the examples that are used in the classroom. And so I think to see someone who is BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, person of color identified in that office is utterly inspiring.
Thank you for that. Dr. Mitchell, we will turn to you. Do you have anything that you would like to add to the way in which Dr. Johnson has framed this matter?
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me join you today. I agree with all that Dr. Johnson just said about the importance of representation. And I have to say, especially after the last 4 years, that it is refreshing to see issues that accentuate the possibilities, right, that we can aspire to. In this administration, President Biden and Vice President Harris, I think are very committed to having a more inclusive conversation and governing of our country. And I think that's very important for us to be a more perfect union. So it's very inspiring to think about the possibilities and to see that we as a nation can be better and be better. Thank you.
Thank you for that. As we talked with young men and women, especially young women and girls across the country, and as we've seen reports of their reactions to the ascendancy, if you will, of Vice President Harris to that role from senator and the previous roles that she had held to bring her to this point, I can't help but agree with both you and Dr. Johnson, about the significance of representation and the degree to which we're all inspired by this and this major accomplishment. Dr. King, the raging incidence of COVID-19 has had a disproportionately devastating impact on the Black and Brown community throughout the United States. Professor King, you have written extensively on health disparities. For students contemplating a career in the healthcare industry, what academic preparation should they demand of their faculty so they can be better equipped to contribute to health equity upon becoming professionals in this field? It's a mouthful, I know.
I love that question, Rosemary. Thank you for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be on this panel with my esteemed colleagues, as always. I just enjoy these moments, and welcome to the community that's joined us today. So that's a great question, right? And so we talk in this country about health disparities, which in many cases that's code language for racial disparities, racial differences in health outcomes. And I argue that we cannot move the needle on racial disparities without addressing systemic racism and recognizing how that shows up in different facets of society, not just within the healthcare sector, but within the community and the way that the communities have been designed and resourced over generations, right, over time. And so students should demand that when professors are talking about first of all, call it what it is, racial disparities, right? When they're talking about racial disparities, that they really are able to create a space that allows students to explore the origins of these disparities. Why do they exist? And what types of policies and practices have been put in place that have disproportionately disadvantaged people of color, right? And until we have those conversations, until we become comfortable talking about them and looking at policies that are not good for society, dismantling those policies, we won't see significant improvements. And we know that the country is becoming more and more diverse, right? And so if people are sick, we cannot have a productive country. We cannot be a global leader. We can't continue to have our place in the world as a global leader. So it has economic impacts as well. So yeah, so in short, knowing the history is key, and understanding the policies and practices that are put in place that disproportionately disadvantage people of color, and recognizing that our health is mostly shaped by where we live, learn, eat, and play, right? We can't just rely on the healthcare system. So if we're teaching students who are pursuing degrees in health and healthcare, we can't do this work in a vacuum and just look at the healthcare sector. We have to recognize the big picture and how it impacts people's health.
Thank you, Dr. King. And the implication of your question really raises the issue of a change, that a change is necessary for racial justice in the United States. Dr. Mitchell, this past summer, we watched the Black Lives Matter movement evolve into a global movement. As a scholar of the late, great Toni Morrison, if she were still with us, what perspectives would she offer about this movement for change and racial justice?
That's an excellent question. I think that Ms. Morrison always believed that Black lives mattered, right? That's what her entire career was situated around, the idea that Black life was important, was valued, was worthy. I think, for example, back to her first novel, The Bluest Eye, in which she writes about a young Black girl. And as she has said in several interviews, the least considered in American society. And that was important for her to give voice to this young Black girl in this story, and to show how racism, especially how it is constructed around the binary of white and Black, informs and thwarts her life. So I think that Morrison, because of the work that she did, not only as a writer, but also as an editor, and also as a professor, that this moment that we witnessed last summer, that certainly has much to in reaction to not only what happened then, but what we have seen certainly since Trayvon Martin, right? That Morrison would be very much in agreement with the aims of, and also the continuation of, centering Black voices in these conversations about equity and justice.
Thank you. I think all of us can say that we have experienced microaggressions as we go about our daily lives, whether they happen at work, whether they happen on a casual walk down the street. This has been something that we've all had to confront. As these new students are joining our community, we hope this does not happen to them, but they may on occasion experience microaggressions as well. Given the amount of interaction that you have had with students over the past, what advice would you give them and what proactive measures would you suggest to our students if they were to come to you, for example, and tell you about an experience that they may have had that had a deleterious effect on them from a fellow student of a different hue? Let me begin by asking Dr. Johnson to comment on this.
That's a really important question. And I think it's important, not just for people who are the targets of microaggressions, and people experience these, subtle slights that are identity based, not just because of their race, right, but because of gender, sexual orientation, etc., other um, marginalized groups in our country. And so I think when I meet with students and when the colleagues in the Office of Student Equity and Inclusion, like the Center for Multicultural Equity and Access, the Georgetown Scholars Program, the LGBTQ Resource Center, the Women's Center, when we meet with students who have had these experiences, I think we first start by just acknowledging them. Because what can happen when we experience microaggressions is this sort of questioning, wait, is that what really happened? And maybe I'm misinterpreting, or you just don't even understand, why you would be the target of a microaggression. And I think that beginning with that acknowledgement is really important. And then helping students to make decisions about what they want to do, right? And questioning whether or not it was a bias incident, right, that they were being discriminated against, that it's something that the university needs to address, as President DeGioia said, alongside them, right? And so if it isn't a bias, is a bias incident, I would encourage them to use the bias reporting system. And you can go to our website and look at bias reporting at Georgetown. Google that and it will pop right up, and there's a form that you can fill out. And then you would be assisted in the process of, again, making a decision about what to even do from there. But setting that more formal process aside, in terms of just navigating microaggressions, making a decision about, okay, what do I want to do about it? Do I want to confront it directly, right? Do I want to just process it so that I can, work through my feelings and emotions that might be impacting me negatively so that I can focus on life, focus on being a college student, focus on studies, focus on being an athlete or being in the choir, being, all of these other things that our students do, working for the Corps, all of these. What do you want to do about it? And there's lots of research about how to address microaggressions and really clever things. And so thinking about, is this something I want to address directly? Is it something I just want to be able to process with a trusted person on campus, whether that is a faculty member, a fellow student, someone in a staff position, and perhaps student affairs, etc. And undergirding them, supporting them, that this is something that happens frequently, and that unfortunately, as much as we'd like to think of Georgetown as a utopia, we're a microcosm of broader society. And so people bring with them what they have learned, their experiences, their pre-existing sort of circumstances come with them when they come to our campus, virtually and in person. And there are strengths and challenges to that. And so helping them to make decisions about how to navigate that.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. I wholeheartedly agree with the approach that you would take if students seek you out for advice on this situation, because you're absolutely correct. We do inadvertently, we do and will be affected and be impacted by this type of behavior, whether it's conscious or unconscious, it doesn't matter. It still does the same damage. And so it's important to recognize, acknowledge, and then affirm the students' feeling of self-worth so that they would go on with their heads held high. We don't want anything of this nature to diminish or take away from the goals with which they came to Georgetown. And we want to make sure that they're able to succeed in every aspect of their lives while they're on our campus. Dr. Mitchell, as a faculty member in the African American Studies Department, would you mind commenting a bit about the origins of the academic department and its evolution from being a program to an academic department, how it has grown, and what your role has been in shaping this very significant department within our university? Dr. Mitchell?
Yes, Rosemary, I'd be happy to. I'd like to follow up just briefly on the idea of microaggression, right? Because of my work in Morrison Studies and her attention to language, I think it's always very helpful for us to be as precise as we can with language, because language structures our realities, right? I think it is helpful. And I'd like to offer that we think sometimes in this way of the aggressions and not the microaggressions. I think if we minimize, right, and I understand why we do that, but I also would like to just put into our spirits why it might be important to think of those small acts as we are thinking of them, that are daily reminders of these deep inequities, right, in American society, as aggressions, so that we might be better equipped to respond to those in those moments, instead of having to think about whether or not this is really what I am experiencing. I think that might feed into that. So that's just one tip that I would offer. The African American Studies program began in 2003. And since then, of course, it has become a thriving and vibrant department of African American Studies. And we've been able to hire wonderful, wonderful scholars of African American Studies to help our students understand the breadth and scope of African American life and culture. And the department now is very strong and is very committed to continuing the study more broadly of African American experience, as well as diasporic experiences as well.
Thank you. Dr. King, I will give you the last question before we ask students and invite students to pose questions that they may have. Given the fact that you are the department chair of Health Systems Administration, we know the importance of having systems in place that can be effective in addressing issues of health disparities. Could you talk a bit about the nature of the work that you and your department is doing in order to contribute to the kind of transformation that we need at a systemic level, so that we can ensure that all patients or all individuals seeking health care are able to thrive and get the kind of care that they deserve?
Yeah, I just want to go back to that whole, I think we've heard several times, representation matters, right?
Sure.
And so this is just a perfect example. We know that healthcare institutions are governed by a board of directors, right? And if that board of directors does not reflect the racial, the cultural diversity of the community that it's serving, that health system is not going to do the best job in meeting the needs of its community, right? And so having that type of approach to how we deliver care is extremely important. So when we talk about the system of healthcare, we're talking about HR, right? And how racial equity concepts need to be integrated in how we practice human resources and human talent management, strategic planning around the future of how health systems are organized and delivered, and the metrics that we're using to govern if we're improving or determine if we're improving the health of a population. Finance, That's another core course in our program. How much does this cost us, right? Health disparities are a significant contributor to we're spending $3.6 trillion in healthcare, almost 2 times more than other industrialized countries. And disparities, that's a significant contributor to those expenses, right? Another one would be health economics, right? So we are applying a racial equity lens in every course. And we believe that's the right thing to do, right? And we have to call it what it is. So, we've gone through the exercise of looking at each course and reframing it to be sure that our students are getting the education that they deserve as Americans, right? If we truly are patriotic, we have to know our history, and we have to know the contributions that people of color have made to this country. And if we continue to go through life ignoring it, then again, we will not be our best selves. Our communities will not reach their full health potential. Our society just will not reach its potential. So, so just looking at all of our classes and making sure that we're applying these concepts, we think is important, and we challenge other disciplines to do the same. We know it's meaningful. Students have an appetite for it. And as we close out, Rosemary, I just want to also say, we talk about students of color and the importance of making sure that students of color have the resources and the support that's necessary to have a meaningful experience at Georgetown. I also am speaking right now to white students, right? It is my hope that you will pursue your degrees with the same level of enthusiasm, with an appetite to learn about the different all of the differences and different cultures and races, and just the beauty and diversity, and really apply that in your experience at Georgetown, and go above and beyond to get exposure to people, places, and things that you haven't had exposure to. Take advantage of that while you're here. It's a wonderful, wonderful environment. You're in the district, Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia. There's just so much culture here, and I just hope that you'll take advantage of it.
Thank you. We have we have 2 questions from the audience. I'm going to begin with the question from, I'm not going to mention her name in case she wants to be anonymous. The question is whether the speakers can talk about imposter syndrome and how that has helped people of color and students who have tried to overcome this. Again, the question is about imposter syndrome. The other question, and you can choose to tackle which one you'd like to. The other question has to do with the extent to which Georgetown has donated money to anti-racist causes. So those are the 2 questions that have come so far from the audience. With regard to the latter question that I posed, what I would say is we have made contributions to a number of community-based organizations. I would not say that it's in the name of anti-racism, but it was done in a way to address some of the issues of health disparities that Dr. King mentioned. For example, Dr. Lucille Campbell-Adams has a clinic, I believe, in Southeast DC, where she provides significant care for members of the community in Southeast DC. For those of you who may not be aware, that's one of the underserved communities within the city of Washington, DC. And so she provides, she and her staff of physicians provide care in a variety of medical areas, as well as I'm being distracted by something that just came into me. I'm sorry about that. As well as Dr. King himself, I think, has participated in some other satellite offices from our School of Nursing and Health Studies that are located not only in Washington, DC, but across the globe, where students have been sent to do internships. Our Center for Social Justice, for example, has done lots of programming in the community, working with youngsters in the DC REACH programs, where we brought people to our campus to work on improving and enhancing their reading skills. Dr. Johnson's, one of the programs under Dr. Johnson's leadership, brings in students from primarily BIPOC students from the community for a Saturday Academy to work on providing and laying the framework and suggesting the possibility of students seeing higher education in their future. So those are some of the examples that immediately come to mind. What I will do is I have your names, the person who raised the question about submission of support for anti-racist comments on anti-racist causes. I will send you an email with more specific information to complement what I've just mentioned so that you have a fuller understanding of what the university has done in these areas.
Can I speak to the imposter syndrome question?
Please do.
You know, one thing that I think we have to be comfortable doing is being vulnerable, right? And using our own story, because we know that our own story can be very, very helpful for others, right? And so I'm one of those folks, right? I am the chair of a department and I have suffered from imposter syndrome, right? Because when I go to meet other chairs who do similar work from different universities, they don't look like me. And so I ask myself, I've overcome it now, but I've asked myself, you know, why am I in this role? Do they just need another? Does the university need another black chair so that we can say that we've dotted our I's and we've crossed our T's when it comes to diversity metrics? I've asked myself those questions. And so what I have done is shared my story with students when they are experiencing similar types of feelings, right? And through my own experience, I know that it has made a difference. And this is why we need diversity, right? Because if I weren't at the table, where would that student of color go and what types of resources would be accessible, right? We wouldn't have as much. So, so just telling our own stories and what I have, you know, through my own journey, what's been helpful for me has been meeting with, you know, get your team of folks, your core support network that can help you navigate those feelings. But what's most important is that you realize that you deserve to be here, right? You deserve to be here. You're just as qualified as any other student. You bring very rich perspective that's needed in order for this university to accomplish its mission. I'll say that again. You bring a very unique perspective that is necessary for us to deliver a high quality education. All right. So no one, please feel that you got here because of chance or because of a quota or because of whatever. You got here because you deserve to be here. And the right people have been put in your lives to get you here. Take advantage of it.
Dr. King, thank you so much for conveying that message. I think it's very important for students to understand because the greater the diversity, the better educated the entire community is. And everyone benefits and no one group has the right to be exclusive when it comes to that. There's also another question that just came in the chat. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Q&A, there is a Q&A button. So please feel free to direct your questions to the Q&A button and then we can have them addressed. And if you have a particular person to whom you'd like to direct the question, please let us know that as well. Dr. Johnson or Dr. Mitchell, do either one of you, would you like to comment on the imposter syndrome or should we move on? What is your preference? Dr. Johnson, please proceed.
Yeah, I'd love to say a bit about that. I agree with everything that Dr. King said. I too suffered from imposter syndrome. While I was a PhD student, I was the only Black person in my doctoral cohort. And I know that there are others on this panel who maybe could speak to similar experiences. And I remember doing research on psychology, the history of psychology. And I found the first Black woman to get a doctoral degree in psychology. And her name is Dr. Inez Beverly Prosser. And she received her doctoral degree in 1934. And I delved deeply into this woman's life. I wanted to know who she was. and what it was that helped her to persevere. And I kept her photograph around, like in my grad assistant office. I started my doctoral dissertation defense with her picture. And it was inspirational for me to know someone else's story who, 1934 was not an easy time for a Black woman to pursue higher education, period, let alone to receive a PhD. And so it was the story of Dr. Prosser that helped to inspire me. And I would underscore the notion that you belong here, that even if you don't see yourself reflected in the professoriate, right, the professors that you take your classes from, or maybe even some of the studies you might be taking, the courses you might be taking, you may be the only one in your classroom who looks like you, that you belong here and you are enough. And relying upon your trusted circle of people and build that is really important. For those of you who are brand new to Georgetown, it's important to start to find who are folks who you can rely on and who will support you, and go to them when you're having those experiences of imposter syndrome so that they can be your cheerleaders, they can build you up, and they can remind you that you are enough, that you build the foundation of our mission, a pursuit of our mission. Without you here, we are not in alignment with our mission. And the classroom, our co-curricular experiences, our clubs, our community engagement is made richer and deeper by your presence.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. That's a great segue into another question that came in. And this question has to do with confidence and who inspired us. And Dr. Johnson just gave us an example of someone who was inspirational in her journey, in her educational and career journey. So Dr. Mitchell, let me turn to you, Dr. Mitchell, and ask you, who helped you the most and what helped you the most in finding the confidence for aiming to be in the role that you currently occupy and the roles that you may have had in the past? And then after you comment on that question, perhaps Dr. Kane can answer as well. Dr. Mitchell, let's begin with you. Unmute.
Yes, thank you. That's a wonderful question. And I think it's so important to share our stories, right? As with many, I am sure, my family, I would always cite as my primary source of inspiration. It sounds cliche-ish, right? But I thought I could do anything. And as we were talking a moment ago, I couldn't help but think about how literature has also been another source of that kind of inspiration, of knowing who I am, the lineages and genealogies from which I come. I couldn't help, but maybe it's just the Southern bodaciousness, right? But I couldn't help but think about Zora Neale Hurston. And once when she wrote, "Sometimes I feel discriminated against, but it doesn't anger me. It merely astonishes me. How can anyone deny themselves the pleasure of my company? It's beyond me." And so I think about those lessons, right? James Baldwin once wrote, "You think your pain is the only pain, and then you read, right? And you know that the world is so much larger." So I think there are these inspirations that are just at our fingertips as well. If we're blessed with family, if we're blessed with friends, if we're blessed with a community that lifts us up, that's wonderful. But then there's also other avenues of self-reflection and self-exploration, and literature, I think. And I think Ms. Morrison would also agree with that, can be one of those too.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. And the theme that I hear is family and the importance of family. And I'll just speak very briefly about my own experience. As a youngster growing up in Guyana, my parents were married at the time that my dad decided to go to England to get a degree. And at that time, he had gone to teachers training college in Guyana. Guyana had no universities or colleges. So for anyone who aspired to higher education, you had to leave the country. And my grandmother's brother went and studied law in England. And so So when and I wasn't even realizing at that time that those were inspiring us and letting us know that if you have to leave the country to aspire to what you want to become, then you do it with the full support and backing of family. So those were the beginnings in my instance, in my particular situation. And so my dad went to England, University of Reading. Actually, it was actually in Scotland, I might add. And then after he earned his degree, he came back to Guyana, worked for several years. Then the educational bug bit him. He came to University of Michigan where he got his PhD and then came back to Guyana. And then later my entire family came. Guyana still did not have a college and university. And as a man who was a bit chauvinistic, couldn't stomach the idea of his two daughters. My brother was 7 years younger than my sister, I'm the oldest. The idea of his daughter going across the ocean, if you will, to study was not one that he particularly relished. And so our entire family came and settled in Ohio. And then I was stuck going to college in the town where my father lived. And so those were my early beginnings. But then more, as I decided to pursue higher education, which was never an option, it was just something that I was going to do. And I chose to go to law school. And the women at that time, this was in 1983 to 1987. At that, I took off a year to have a child, which is why it took me 4 years. In any event, at that time, you could count the number of women teaching in law school. And I think every woman who was studying law, and at that time, the representation of women in law school at Georgetown, which is where I earned my law degree, we had about maybe 20, well, no more than 20, 25%, which was still considered pretty high. Georgetown had 2,500 law students, the largest law school in the country at that time. And so, as Dr. Johnson mentioned, representation was important, and seeing those women teaching in the classroom and knowing that if they have gone through and fought that fight as students, then of course it gave you the sense that you had that possibility as well. Dr. King, let me ask you, what role did family and role models and mentoring play in your journey to where you have landed today?
Rosemary, I am so blessed because I have a grandmother who will turn 100 years old in the year 2021. She'll be 100 on June 25th of this year. And just having access to her and her knowledge and her telling me stories about what it was like to grow up as a Black woman who cleaned houses for the rich and wealthy, affluent communities in Bethesda, Maryland, right outside of Washington, D.C. Has just been one of my greatest gifts in life. So she's one of my. I'm a student of hers. I call her my favorite and best history teacher, right? And even today, I'll sit at the table and just listen to her talk. And I just let her talk and I just take it all in. A mentor told me, so I'm going to shift now. A mentor told me years ago, find someone, and it could be someone that you know or someone that you don't know, that you have mad respect for, right? It's just like they can do no wrong. And for me, those two individuals were Martin Luther King, and I don't think I'm related. I've tried to make that happen, but I don't think I have a case. Martin Luther King, right? And really studying King and his, not just his teachings, but the way he moved about the world, right? For me, that's something I just have the most respect for and strive each and every day to emulate those behaviors. And the other is Barack Obama, you know?
That's right.
And I am always in awe of his ability to always maintain his composure in the midst of the greatest storms, right? And staying centered. And that's just something that that's the person that I strive to be, and the way that I hope people see me as I move about the world. But it's a work in progress, right? So I would just encourage everyone to seek that role model and be serious about it and really get to know that individual. And you don't have to know him personally or her personally, but really know the work and the way that person lives his or her life, and use that as inspiration for yourself.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, Dr. Mitchell, Dr. King. I am very grateful to all of you for this provocative and thought-provoking discussion that we've had today. And I would like to turn the program over now to Catherine, who is going to have a few announcements to close us out. Thank you very much for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much to all our panelists. This is Catherine from the new student orientation team with some announcements on next steps. You will now be heading to a small group discussion with your orientation advisor, starting at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Please visit the NSO Canvas course and click the OA Group Zoom links to find your group Zoom room. Thank you. We will now end this session.